In the summer of 1982, two Steven Spielberg films hit theaters just 1 week apart, E.T. the Extraterrestrial and Poltergeist. Both told stories of suburban families visited by forces beyond their understanding, and both carried that unmistakable Spielberg blend of wonder and fear. Yet only one of them officially listed Spielberg as the director. Poltergeist began as Spielberg's idea, and he brought in Texas Chainsaw Massacre director Tobe Hooper to helm the project. On paper, it was the perfect partnership. Hollywood's most powerful filmmaker teaming up with one of horror's boldest voices. But once production began, rumors spread that Spielberg's influence went far beyond that of a typical producer. Crew members, actors, and even Spielberg and Hooper themselves had conflicting accounts of who was really calling the shots. More than 40 years later, that mystery still haunts the film. So let's dive in and find out who really directed Poltergeist. After the success of Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Spielberg wanted to make another film about aliens, but this time he wanted it to be frightening. His idea, Night Skies, centered on a rural family under siege by extraterrestrials. The film's emotional core came from Jaybird, a young autistic boy who forms an unlikely bond with one of the gentler aliens, Buddy. But unlike Spielberg's earlier films, Night Skies ended on a somber note. Buddy is abandoned by his cruel companions, left alone on Earth as a hawk circles overhead. The script's melancholy tone moved writer Melissa Matheson to tears when Spielberg showed it to her, while she was on set of Raiders of the Lost Ark, where she was visiting her partner Harrison Ford. At the time, Spielberg was homesick and reflecting on his own childhood, particularly the imaginary alien friend he had created to cope with his parents' divorce as a kid. Realizing that Night Skies was too bleak, together with Matheson, he took the tender friendship between Jaybird and Buddy and reimagined it as the heart of a new story. From that collaboration came E.T. However, Spielberg wasn't ready to abandon Night Skies and sought another director to helm it, pitching it to Tobe Hooper, the Texas-born director who had made the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, one of the most shocking horror films ever made. Hooper admired Spielberg's storytelling, but wasn't drawn to science fiction. His fascination was with the supernatural, the spirits, curses, and the dark corners of ordinary life. After reading Night Skies, Hooper proposed a simple but thought-provoking idea. What if, instead of aliens invading a farmhouse, it was ghosts haunting a suburban home? That single question changed everything. Spielberg immediately saw the potential. The new story kept the themes he loved, family, innocence, and intrusion, but replaced the sci-fi horror with something spiritual and unseen. The lonely farmhouse setting became the comfortable suburbs of Middle America, and the monsters came not from space, but from the walls of the house itself. And just like that, Poltergeist was born. Spielberg decided to co-write and produce the film, while Hooper would direct it. On paper, the partnership looked perfect. Spielberg was the most successful filmmaker in Hollywood at the time, the master of adventure and emotion. Hooper was a respected horror director, known for raw intensity and creative fear. Spielberg could give Hooper the budget, talent, and tools he'd never had before, while Hooper could add a darker, grittier tone to Spielberg's polished world. But when production began, the partnership proved more complicated than anyone expected. Filming started in 1981 at MGM Studios, and while Hooper was the director, Spielberg's presence on set was constant. Because of his contract with Universal for E.T., Spielberg was forbidden from directing another movie at the same time. But Poltergeist started as his idea, and he couldn't keep his distance. Crew members later said it often felt like there were two directors on set. Spielberg was energetic, running from camera setups to props, suggesting lines, adjusting angles, and guiding actors. Hooper, on the other hand, was quieter, more patient, and often indecisive. Their personalities couldn't have been more different. One a whirlwind of creativity, the other a careful craftsman. The difference sometimes caused friction. Actress Beatrice Straight, who played Dr. Lesh, once confronted Spielberg over a line of dialogue he had written, saying it was so awkward even Laurence Olivier couldn't make it sound real. Spielberg would apologize, and Hooper would reshoot the scene the next day. It was a small moment, but one that revealed how blurred the boundaries had become between the two filmmakers. Cinematographer John Leonetti later claimed that Spielberg, not Hooper, was the one truly directing the film, while actress Zelda Rubinstein, who played the psychic Tangina, said Spielberg directed every day she was on set. Others, however, told a different story. Lead actors Craig T. Nelson and Jo Beth Williams maintained that Hooper was the one calling action and cut, guiding performances, and managing the set like any director would. Even Spielberg himself seemed to acknowledge the blurred lines between them, admitting that Hooper wasn't a particularly assertive presence, and that when questions arose on set, Spielberg often stepped in to offer direction over the more quiet Hooper, while Hooper would nod in agreement. The finished film definitely had many of the characteristics of Spielberg's other films. It shared the same warm suburban atmosphere that defined E.T. and Close Encounters, and had that familiar mix of wonder and unease lurking beneath everyday life. One of its most memorable moments, when a mother turns away for a second and the kitchen chairs suddenly stack themselves, was executed in a single continuous shot. The illusion required perfect timing. Several crew members had only seconds to rush in, rearrange the chairs, and disappear before the camera panned back. Spielberg personally choreographed the movement and timing of the camera, while Hooper guided the actors' reactions and pacing. The result is a seamless bit of movie magic that feels so quintessentially Spielberg. However, beneath the film's glossy, sentimental surface lurks Hooper's unmistakable darkness. The infamous moment of a man clawing off his own face, the mud-soaked corpses rising in the flooded pool, and the rotting chaos of the finale. Hooper's fascination with decay, mortality, and the collapse of suburban normalcy seeps into every shadow. Poltergeist may gleam with Spielberg's polish, but it's haunted by Hooper's nightmares. Part of the reason Spielberg may have been so hands-on with Poltergeist came down to timing. In early 1982, Hollywood was bracing for a potential director's strike, and there was real concern that ongoing productions could be shut down. To avoid delays, some could argue that Spielberg was on set to help push things along. According to crew members, Hooper was so nice and just so happy to be there, contributing creatively but ultimately deferring to Spielberg, who had developed the story and felt a sense of ownership over it. The arrangement wasn't meant as an insult to Hooper, it was a practical workaround. But in practice, Spielberg ended up directing a lot of the film, occasionally stepping back to let Hooper handle certain scenes. What began as a precautionary measure to keep the movie on schedule ultimately blurred the lines of authorship in ways that would haunt both men for decades. As Poltergeist neared release, the rumors about Spielberg's involvement reached their peak. MGM's marketing didn't help. Spielberg's producer credit in the trailers dwarfed Hooper's directing credit underneath it. The Directors Guild of America stepped in to investigate whether the studio had violated crediting rules, eventually being fined $15,000 for diminishing Hooper's credit. To defuse the situation, Spielberg wrote an open letter to Hooper, published in Variety, stating that their collaboration was a unique creative relationship. The letter was meant as praise, but it only added fuel to the fire. Behind-the-scenes photos and videos only fueled it further and made it worse. Spielberg was frequently photographed giving directions, positioning actors, or operating cameras. To the public, it looked like clear evidence of Spielberg's control, but crew members later explained that Hooper was present and directing, and Spielberg simply couldn't help getting involved. So who really directed it? The truth likely lies somewhere in between the two extremes. Spielberg didn't secretly take over Poltergeist, but he certainly didn't stay in the background either. By all accounts, he was an extremely hands-on producer, deeply involved in every facet of production, and even directing second-unit footage. The dynamic wasn't unlike Raiders of the Lost Ark, where George Lucas conceived the idea and produced while Spielberg directed. Lucas, despite being the producer, still directed second-unit sequences, and was heavily involved in development and post-production. With Poltergeist, those roles were effectively reversed. Spielberg was in Lucas's position, yet he couldn't resist stepping in. The difference was that Lucas trusted Spielberg completely on Raiders, giving him room to direct and make creative choices, even as he remained involved behind the scenes. Spielberg, on the other hand, didn't seem to extend the same trust or autonomy to Hooper. Instead of simply overseeing the production, he actively inserted himself into nearly every phase of it. It wasn't just a collaboration, it was an overreach. Spielberg treated Poltergeist less like a film he was producing and more like a film he couldn't quite let go of, unable to resist shaping it into something that felt entirely his own. In hindsight, Spielberg probably should have just waited until after E.T. to make the film himself. Instead, he poured so much of himself into Poltergeist that it became a challenge to separate his fingerprints from Hooper's. When Poltergeist hit theaters in June '82, just 1 week before E.T., it became a major success, grossing over $120 million worldwide and earning 3 Oscar nominations. The two films dominated the box office so completely that Time and Newsweek dubbed it the Spielberg Summer. It was another triumph in Spielberg's already golden streak, but for Hooper, Poltergeist should have been the film that launched him into Hollywood's directing elite. When a filmmaker delivers a hit of that size, the phone usually starts ringing. Studio offers pour in, big budget scripts land on your desk, and your next move is whatever you want it to be. But that didn't happen for Hooper. Instead of being courted by major studios, he signed a 3-picture deal with Cannon Films, a B-tier studio best known for its pulpy action flicks and low to mid-budget genre movies. To their credit, Cannon went all in on Hooper. His first film under the deal, Life Force, had a staggering $25 million budget, the largest of his career, and was an ambitious blend of sci-fi, horror, and erotic fantasy. But despite Cannon's gamble, the movie bombed at the box office, setting the tone for what would become a string of underperforming projects for Hooper. What should have been his rise to the A-list instead marked the beginning of a slow fade from it. Instead of being hailed as the man who directed one of the decade's defining horror films, he found himself overshadowed. Many in Hollywood viewed Poltergeist as a Spielberg movie in all but name, but the debate over who really directed it clung to Hooper for the rest of his career. Even after Hooper's death, the question still lingers. Spielberg at the time released a heartfelt tribute, calling him a kind, decent, and talented man who made you proud of your fears. But the controversy never truly died. Much like the restless spirits in Poltergeist itself, the debate over who directed the film refused to stay buried. Thanks for watching, everybody, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more of Hollywood's untold stories and unmade movies.